Welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into a medical mystery. It's about a taboo treatment for a type of pain that is, frankly, unimaginable. We're looking at how a Schedule I substance might actually be the only true biological reboot for a disease that modern medicine just hasn't been able to conquer.
So, to really get this, I want you to imagine a pain so severe that patients consistently rate it as worse than childbirth, kidney stones, or even an amputation without anesthesia. It's literally a condition that redefines human suffering. The word headache completely fails to capture the catastrophic reality here. It's like calling a third-degree burn a minor skin irritation, right? Neurologists and pain researchers consistently describe what we're about to discuss as the most severe pain a human being can possibly experience.
Section 1. The most painful condition, cluster headaches.
We're talking about a disease so agonizing that medical literature has actually documented patients fracturing their own skulls, literally banging their heads against walls just to cope with the pain. It destroys careers, it ruins marriages, and it pushes the human body way past the absolute limits of physical endurance. Let's break down the anatomy of the suffering. During an episodic siege, what neurologists call a cluster period, patients can suffer up to 10 attacks every single day. And these periods can last for weeks, sometimes months, usually returning annually or biannually with terrifying clockwork regularity.
And each of these unannounced attacks, it builds to its maximum intensity in just 5 to 10 minutes. It then sustains a blinding 10 out of 10 pain level for anywhere from 15 minutes to 3 excruciating hours. Now, unlike migraine sufferers who might just retreat to a dark, quiet room to lie down, cluster headache patients absolutely cannot be still. The pain is so intense it forces them to pace, rock, and scream. The agitation isn't just a side effect here, it's an actual diagnostic feature of the disease.
This condition affects roughly 0.1% of the population. To put that into perspective, that's about 330,000 Americans. But here's the truly devastating part. For 20% of these patients, the condition is chronic. That means the cluster period and those daily attacks, they never actually end. There is no remission, just a continuous, indefinite cycle of agony.
Top headache neurologists validate this staggering reality. Peter Godsby, who's one of the absolute top experts in the world on this, explicitly calls it the worst pain known to medical science. Because of this relentless torment, an astonishing 55% of sufferers report having considered suicide during a cluster period. That staggering statistic has earned the condition its grim but incredibly accurate clinical nickname, suicide headaches. To truly understand why this happens and why the ultimate treatment we'll talk about is so surprising, we've got to define the beast. Cluster headaches are classified as a TAC, a trigeminal autonomic cephalalgia. Now, in plain English, this just means the pain hits one side of the head, usually behind one eye, and involves 3 complex systems all firing at once. You have the trigeminal vascular system, the autonomic nervous system, and the hypothalamic circadian clock. Basically, one side, one eye, absolute agony.
Section 2. Why standard medicine fails, the treatment gap.
So you might be wondering, why on earth can't modern medicine stop this? We have all these incredible pharmaceuticals, right? Well, the pharmacological arsenal for cluster headaches relies on 3 main pillars, and the gap in treatment is honestly pretty stark. Take a look at oxygen therapy. It works for about 60 to 70% of people, but you need a heavy tank and a mask during a tiny 5-minute window when the pain is building. That's basically impossible if you're out and about. Then we have triptans, which are injectable vasoconstrictors. They work fast, sure, but because they constrict blood vessels, you can't safely use them more than twice a day. If you're having 10 attacks a day, you are completely unprotected for the other 8. Finally, there's verapamil, a cardiac drug used to prevent attacks, but it takes 2 to 4 weeks to even start working, leaving patients agonizingly vulnerable in the meantime, and it requires intense heart monitoring. So the crucial takeaway here is that while these treatments can manage individual attacks, absolutely nothing in conventional medicine stops the underlying cluster period itself.
Section 3. The patient-led discovery, a biological cure.
Now, what's genuinely fascinating is how desperate, basically abandoned patients decided to take science into their own hands. Back in the early 2000s, patients started sharing stories on internet forums about using taboo substances like psilocybin mushrooms and finding that their cluster periods were miraculously terminating. This patient-generated data got so loud, it actually caught the attention of researchers at Harvard Medical School.
A 2006 Harvard study formally documented this wild discovery. Out of 26 episodic patients who self-administered psilocybin or LSD, a staggering 22 had their cluster period completely terminated. We aren't talking about a slight reduction in pain here. We're talking about a response rate that absolutely dwarfs conventional medicine. The cluster period just stopped.
This incredible grassroots movement was driven by organizations like Cluster Busters, which was founded by a patient named Bob Wold in 2002. These patients, facing a disease that literally drives people to end their lives, were basically forced by medical abandonment to become their own clinical investigators. By meticulously logging their experiences, they forced the medical establishment to stop and pay attention to these staggering empirical results.
Section 4. The Neuroscience of Relief, How Psilocybin Works. Let's look at the science and see how this actually builds into a multidimensional biological cure, rather than just some mystical counterculture lore. Like, why would a psychedelic compound terminate a cluster headache period? Well, psilocybin works through a 3-step convergence, targeting the exact anatomy we talked about earlier. First up, trigeminal agonism. Psilocybin binds to specific serotonin receptors to suppress the release of CGRP, which is the master neuropeptide driving the pain and vasodilation. Second, and maybe the most elegant part, it acts as a total system reboot for the hypothalamic circadian clock. Remember how we said attacks happen with clockwork seasonal regularity? Psilocybin disrupts that pathological pattern. And third, it reduces neuroinflammation right in the brainstem's pain processing centers. It is a true multi-dimensional intervention.
Section 5. Healing without the high. The sub-hallucinogenic dose.
And guys, here is the most medically transformative detail of this entire explainer. One of the biggest barriers to using psilocybin as medicine is usually the need for a supervised, intense psychological trip. But for cluster headaches, it works without the high. We are looking at 2 entirely different protocols here. The standard dose for treating something like depression is about 25 milligrams of psilocybin, which causes a profound alteration of consciousness. But the cluster headache relief dose, it's merely 2.5 to 7.5 milligrams. That's just half a gram to 1.5 grams of dried mushroom. It is sub-hallucinogenic. Patients are successfully terminating their periods without needing a heavy trip or an expensive guide to get physical relief. The biological mechanism operates completely below the threshold of hallucination.
Using thousands of patient years of shared experience, sufferers actually mapped out this empirical protocol themselves. They take a sub-hallucinogenic dose right at the onset of a cluster period, using 3 to 5 doses spaced exactly 5 days apart. But there is a massive safety step here. They must avoid triptans and SSRIs for 24 to 48 hours before and after to prevent receptor blocking or dangerous drug interactions. It's an incredibly safe, low-dose protocol that effectively resets their neurological pathways right at home.
Section 6. The Future of Treatment, Clinical Science.
Thankfully, this patient lore has officially made the leap into peer-reviewed, controlled science. The medical community is finally catching up to what these patients have known for 2 decades. In 2021, Yale researcher Emanuel Schindler published a landmark study. It was the very first randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial testing psilocybin for cluster headaches. And you know what? The results proved it. Psilocybin significantly reduced cluster attack frequencies compared to an active placebo like niacin. It documented dose-dependent effects, totally proving that this is a pharmacological response, not just some placebo effect. But to be scientifically honest with you, there are still some gaps we need to fill. While the signal is incredibly clear and the relief is unprecedented, we still need extensive clinical trials to figure out the exact optimal dosing regimens. We also need to solve the mystery of why chronic sufferers, the ones who never ever get a break, seem to respond at lower rates than episodic sufferers. On top of that, we lack long-term safety data for patients who might be mixing this with complex cardiac medications. And finally, we still need direct human validation of that brilliant hypothalamic reset mechanism we talked about.
Yet even with those gaps, what we're looking at here is truly extraordinary. We have a compound that achieves what absolutely no modern pharmaceutical has reliably done, completely ending a cycle of deadly, insurmountable pain. Imagine that. A single low dose and a period of unimaginable agony just ends. For the 330,000 Americans living with this condition, it represents unprecedented, absolute relief.
Which leaves us with one provocative, lingering thought to close out today's explainer. When we consider the staggering success of this sub-hallucinogenic intervention, its safety profile, and the total failure of conventional medicine to stop these suicide headaches, Is it merely regulatory inertia rather than actual safety concerns that's keeping these patients in endless agony? I really want you to think about that. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next explainer.